Hi there, thanks for tuning in. I'm Nathan Kiley and this is Design Your Own Strength and Conditioning Program Part 1. Today I'll be focusing on the resistance training component of a strength and conditioning program. First of all, a little about me. My name's Nathan Kiley. I'm a strength and conditioning coach. I've been working full-time for one season at Newington College where I work with the rugby program. We're just transitioning into summer sport now where I'll be focusing on basketball and cricket development. In addition to this, I've undertaken numerous internships with organisations like the Australian Rugby Sevens and the Newtown Jets Rugby League Club, who feed to current NRL premiers, the Cronulla Sharks. I also undertake some private speed and agility coaching, in which I work with a variety of mostly young developing athletes. So into today's webinar, first just a quick outline of some of the things that we'll be going over. First of all, we'll be identifying the various training phases that you'll need to consider when designing a program. We'll talk about selecting an appropriate training split. We're going to delve a little into exercise selection, progression and regression. We'll go over some basics of programming and I'll demonstrate some practical examples at the end for you to look at. So let's start off by looking at the various training phases. Different sources will give a very large variety of different ways that they'll break down the various training phases and how they'll classify them. For the purposes of today, I'm going to give you 4 different training phases that you'll need to look at. First is general preparation, then our specific preparation. Then depending on our sport, we might have a pre-competition or peaking phase, or we'll have an in-season maintenance phase. Those last 2 phases can work interchangeably or be organised in different ways. It just depends on the sport. First, let's look at general preparation. So general preparation is going to occur at the start of your pre-season training. You're going to be looking to emphasise general preparation exercises. So what we're looking for is just general development of athleticism. We're not trying to worry too much about getting great at our sport just yet. We just want to build a well-rounded athlete during general preparation. It's important that we focus on learning the techniques of our exercises, and typically during a general preparation phase there will be a larger overall volume. I've made a note here saying that there's no need for recovery aids. This could be debatable, but typically what we're actually trying to do is elicit fatigue. Fatigue is going to lead to the adaptations that we're looking for. So using things like ice baths or compression garments and things like this in order to aid our recovery is probably a little bit counterproductive. We're actually trying to fatigue our system and force it to adapt to this new stimulus that it's not used to. So during the general preparation phase, what we're trying to do is create physiological adaptations. So this is going to be more focused on building bigger muscles, developing our aerobic base. So I've got a list of some examples here: muscle cross-sectional area, capillary density, etc., etc. You don't need to worry too much about that sort of stuff, but especially from this strength program perspective, what we're really trying to do is develop bigger muscles. A larger muscle has greater potential to produce force. You're then going to transition into specific preparation. This is going to probably be the last 4 to 6 weeks, leading into the first competition of the year. At this stage, you're going to incorporate special strength exercises, or what can often be called, according to Bondarchuk, specific developmental or specific preparation exercises. These are exercises that are going to have a little bit more similarity to the sport itself and the competitive exercise. You're going to be looking at trying to find ways to make your training look a little bit more like what you're going to be doing on the field. During specific preparation, intensity is going to increase in terms of the loads that we're using. Volume may decrease a little bit as the focus will change somewhat towards the sport itself. You'll be focusing more on developing your skills in a game setting and things like that. So you're probably going to have a little bit less time to train in the gym. So as I said before, pre-competition or peaking phases and in-season maintenance. they're going to be a little bit interchangeable, and it'll depend on the sport and the way that the season is structured. But a pre-competition or peaking phase is probably going to be the last 1 or 2 weeks leading into a major competition or finals or whatever the big time is for your sport. So you're obviously going to be focusing on your sport-specific skills. That's the key here. You want to be training the sport, trying to get your techniques and your skills right up to standard. But we still don't want to skip our training sessions in the gym with our strength component. We need to make sure that we are still in the best physical state to perform our skills at the highest level. So we're going to have a high intensity, however, the volume is going to be quite low. What we want to do is focus on speed and power development during this stage. We want to maximize our neural adaptations. So this is going to be our rate of force development and muscle unit recruitment. They're just a couple of examples, but basically what we want is to ensure that those big powerful muscles that we built earlier in the season are now working at peak performance. Muscles are slaves to the brain. In-season maintenance, concurrent training. So concurrent training just means that we're keeping everything topped up. We're giving a little bit of this, a little bit of that. Sometimes this can be described as micro-dosing. So, for example, 1 week, you still want to be doing this in an educated manner, but it's not going to be just random. So, for example, 1 week we might have a strength focus in the gym. The next week it could be a hypertrophy focus. Then we might have a speed and power focus. Concurrent just means we're doing a little bit of everything at the same time. In season maintenance, we're also looking to focus on recovery. We want to make sure we're fresh and ready to go come Saturday or whenever game day is. The volumes are going to be a little bit lower, but high intensity. So this is quite similar to the peaking phase. Again, we're looking for those neural adaptations. We want to hold on to those gains made earlier in the training season, in the training cycle, in pre-season. We want to still be strong and powerful, but we also need to be fresh and ready to go come game day. So the next section of this webinar is all about training splits. And this is how we go about deciding what we're going to train on what days of the week. So I've got a list of a couple of examples here for whether or not you're going to be training 2 sessions per week or 3 sessions per week. You could train up to 4 sessions per week, especially in that general preparation phase. But most of the year you're going to be on a 2 or 3 sessions per week training split. So I've just provided a couple of little examples here. If you want, you can just pause the video and have a look at those. What I would say is that sometimes we can get a little bit complex in the way that we try and prescribe things like this. So keeping something really simple is oftentimes the best way to go about it. So something like a lower body, upper body, or a lower body, upper body, full body training split are oftentimes very easy and basic ways to go about making sure that we're ticking all the boxes. So part 3 of this webinar is about exercise selection. So exercise selection is essential to get right. You can't make a meal of this one or you're going to be in big trouble. So there's a couple of different ways that we try and classify exercises. Number 1 is by various movement patterns. So we've got squat and hinge, which are both lower body dominant movements. You can also have unilateral lower body movements, so that's single leg work. We've got horizontal and vertical pushes and pulls. We've also got bracing through the core. They're probably the ways that you would best break down movements by movement pattern. Then we've also got by specificity to the sport itself. So we've got all these abbreviations here. I'll run through them for you now. So GPE is general preparation exercises. All of this stuff again comes back to Bondarchuk. Specific preparation exercises, specific developmental exercises, and CE is the competition exercise itself. Now it's important, and we'll go through this soon, to be conservative when we're selecting exercises. We don't want to make sure that we've ticked all the boxes before we move on to the next exercise in the progression. So here's some examples of exercise progressions. These are lower body movements, and they've been broken down into movement patterns. So typically I find that squat and hinge patterns are probably the 2 most butchered by athletes. I typically look for these progressions to set athletes up for the later progressions down the line. I'd just like to make a point about the hinge progression here, and if you have a look at that one there. The kneeling band hinge, without a video or an image, that one's a bit hard to get your head around, but basically you've got the athlete with a band around their hips attached to a pole or something behind them. They've also got a band which they're holding behind their neck with their arms overhead, sort of. I guess it's sort of like if you're about to do like a triceps extension overhead. They're kneeling down, both these bands are attached behind them, and we're just trying to make sure that they keep a nice flat back with that band that they're holding in their hands, and we've also got the band around their hips to help them groove that hinge pattern. A band pull through is just a simple progression from that. We get them standing up, they're holding the band with their hands just in between their legs in the groin area there. That band again is just there to help them hinge back into the movement, and then they're going to come through, drive the hips forward and squeeze the glutes at the top. RDL, Romanian deadlift, that's probably my favourite hinge variation. I think you can probably spend years doing RDLs and keep making great gains. Rack or block pulls, so you're just taking the RDL and you've got the straight barbell on a rack or on weightlifting blocks, and we're just pulling up in the concentric phase there. And then the last progression I've got here is a trap bar deadlift. So it might be something that might raise an eyebrow for some viewers that there's no straight bar deadlifting from the floor mentioned here. I love the exercise. I mean, it's something I do in my own training, but I'm not a team sport athlete. I don't know if there's much need to do it in a team sport environment. I think there's probably better things we can be doing with our time, and it's a bit of a risk versus reward scenario as well. We're sort of placing athletes in compromised positions with the lower back quite exposed, and training around lower back injuries as well. I think something like a trap bar deadlift or a Romanian deadlift or something like that is probably just a safer option. I'll just go back very quickly as well. So if you look at the single leg variations here, you'll notice Bosch clean variations. So Franz Bosch has, I think he's done a good job in trying to help coaches who are big fans of the Olympic lifting variations and trying to help them make those exercises a little bit more specific to sport-specific training itself. So it might be worth just having a look on YouTube at some Bosch clean variations as well. So basically what you've got there is like a hang power clean with the finish position with the front. It's like a split clean, I guess. We're doing a hang clean into a split catch position with the front leg on an elevated box. Exercise movement patterns, upper body classifications. So horizontal push and horizontal pull. I think a lot of those are pretty straightforward examples there. Vertical push. That one's one that I probably break right down and try and teach athletes how to stack their core properly so that they haven't got lumbar extension. And then you can even take those vertical push variations into Olympic lifting variations with things like a push jerk or a split jerk later down the line once the athletes are quite competent at those other variations. Vertical pull, I think something as simple as a chin up is pretty hard to beat, or a pull up, and we're just trying to develop strength so that athletes can train those exercises there. Now I've also got a page here just going through some other exercises that probably don't fit into the standard mold of exercise classification that people would normally think about. So I've got some core exercises here, some jumps and some plyometrics, even some throws as well. Just looking at the core exercises here, I think the biggest thing to note here is that we're not doing any sort of like sit-ups or crunches or anything like that. From my perspective, when I'm looking at what the core's responsibility really is in the human organism, is to provide support and stability and control. So I'm not saying that I won't do core rotational exercises, depending on the sport. Say for example, if we're working with a tennis player or a batsman in cricket or a golfer or something like that, then there would be a place for things like that. But with most team sport athletes who are playing in a field-based setting, I'm just looking for stability through the core. So all those exercises there are just core stability, making sure that we're not getting unwanted rotation or lumbar extension, things like that. Also got our jump progressions here. So a drop stick is just with our hands reached above the head, reaching for the sky, up on our toes, and we're dropping down into our athletic power position. That's just to learn those positions, and we go into a drop stick into a single leg position. SL just stands for single leg there. So same exercise, but when we land, we're just landing on one leg. NCM box jumps, that's non-counter movement box jumps. So what we're looking for there is the athlete to not utilize the stretch shortening cycle. The athlete's already down in a quarter squat position before they jump onto the box, or they could even be sitting on a box or a seat or something before they jump up. Another side note, there's definitely a place for counter movement box jumps, but just been reading some interesting research lately around muscle slack, intramuscular coordination, and things like that, and I think something like a non-counter movement box jump is probably a better way to really train the nervous system to be efficient and powerful. So an altitude drop stick, that's just stepping off a high box and working on absorbing that force. I think there's a lot of coaches now that are catching on to the idea that force absorption before force production is really essential to make sure that our athletes know how to land and control their body weight through that eccentric phase of landing. That's definitely going to be something that's going to lead to reduced injury rates. Altitude drop stick, single leg, and then we start going to drop jumps and other variations as well. I've got some plyometrics here, so we've just got some hurdle jumps. We're just looking for, to begin with, in this progression here, a jump means two legs, so it's bilateral, whereas a hop is single leg, so same leg to the same leg again. We're not going from one leg to the other. That would be a bound. That's just the way that we use it. It's a case of semantics, but it's a good way to just make sure that all the coaches are on the same page working in our setting. So we're just starting off with some real basic stuff, starting off by sticking our landings, and we start to go to continuous movements, and then we go to single leg variations. We've also got a similar progression with our lateral plyometrics. Finally here I've got my throw variations, so kneeling medicine ball chest pass. So we're kneeling down, two hands, throwing the ball at the wall, and we work our way all the way to the point where we finish off with a run up into a medicine ball lateral pass. So we're getting very dynamic towards the end there. Now, all of that is a little bit bland to listen to, and you're probably bored half to sleep by now. But the important point to note, if I just go back through all of these progressions, is that what we're looking for here is you to find where you're at on the continuum of each of these exercise progressions. So without skipping anything that you can't already adequately do, for example, say if we're moving towards back squatting, I think lots of athletes have back squatted and never actually earned the right to, because they've never done something like a mummy squat and then worked onto the front squat there. So these are just examples of progressions, but it's really important that you find what's the you starting off at the beginning, working our way through. What stage are you up to in that progression? We've also got some explosive movements here again. So squat jump or trap bar jump, hang clean pull, hang clean high pull. All these clean variations, I mean, it's all very technical stuff, so it's more a matter of where you're at on the continuum of technical proficiency rather than where your strength levels are at. Also some upper body stuff there as well. Anyway, so back to the more important nuts and bolts of all of this is probably going to revolve around the actual programming side of things. So it's really important that we understand these basics here. Progressive overload. So progressive overload is all about starting off with X amount of load, and then over time we ensure that that load gradually increases and increases and increases. This is strength training 101. Without progressive overload, we will not make progress. Progressive overload is all about exposing the body to a new stimulus so that it must adapt and get stronger or better capable of withstanding that stress in the future. Now there's a variety of ways that we can utilize progressive overload, and they're all a product of these various training variables that I've listed here. So type, mode, modality, that's all different words for the same thing. That's basically the exercise selection that we're talking about, so we can overload, say, our squat movement by using a different type of squat exercise. So if you just come back to lower body here, squat. So if we start off with a kettlebell goblet squat, well, let's go do 2 kettlebells in the front rack position and do a kettlebell front squat. That's overloading through type. Frequency, that comes back to our training split. How many days per week are we training, or how many training sessions per day even. Volume, that's going to be the number of repetitions in sets, the total number of repetitions in a session, essentially. Intensity, that's going to be how much weight is on the bar or how fast we move that bar. Those are 2 different types of intensity that can be varied. So, for example, when we have a look at the various training phases that we'll go into, so for example, accumulation phase, intensification phase, we'll work to that in a moment. When we have a look at that stuff there, what you'll find is that the load itself is typically what we vary, but you can also vary the speed of the bar. So a lot of people don't have access to something like GymAware or the Tendo unit or something like that, these velocity-based training programs and things like this. But there's always something to be said for the intent to move the bar as fast as possible during the concentric phase or the lifting phase of the movement. And then the last one is recovery. That can be time in between sets or time in between sessions. So if you shorten up the recovery, you're going to overload the system as well. Programming. So different sources will give a variety of different ways that they'll split up training blocks. For the purposes of this webinar, these are the 3 that I use at the moment. It's worth noting that all of my athletes are developmental athletes. They're all probably ranging from the age of 12 up to 18 years of age. So I typically, throughout the season, just switch between an accumulation phase and an intensification phase, and I just keep alternating between the 2 of those. And then say they've got finals coming at the end of the year, you'll have one little peaking phase at the end of the season just to taper off some of the fatigue and really get them ready for competition at the end. So I'm going to go into the details of what these all mean now. So an accumulation phase, I suppose a lot of these things probably look similar to what we talked about in the general preparation phase. And I think I'll just quickly go back a step, because it might be a little bit confusing what's the difference between these 3 phases that I've mentioned here and the phases that we spoke about earlier in this webinar. So the things that we spoke about earlier in terms of general prep, specific prep, in-season and peaking, or pre-competition, things like that, they're probably just ways to look at your overall season as a whole and identifying different times of the year and what we're trying to chase in terms of our goals at that time of the year. These different phases here are the ways that we go about it. This is more the how rather than the why. So take, for example, in-season maintenance. You can just keep alternating between accumulation phases and intensification phases. General prep, you select all the exercises that you think are appropriate for that stage of the training year, and maybe the first 3 weeks you have an accumulation phase, and then the second 3 weeks you have an intensification phase. That's just some ways to break all this stuff down. But from my perspective, I think most athletes will benefit greatly from more focus on these 3 phases that we're talking about now, accumulation, intensification, peaking, rather than getting too fussed about some of the other stuff spoken about before. I think it's still important that you understand it, though, just to have that background information there. So accumulation phase, what we're trying to achieve here is the development of physiological attributes, muscle cross-sectional area, mitochondrial density, etc. We're typically using higher volume, 6 to 12 reps. I like to utilize tempo to manipulate technical development, so I'll get guys to use an isometric hold in the bottom of a rep, or focus on a slow descent just to groove that technical proficiency in the lift that we're working on. And I've got a couple of different things here, and this depends on the sport that you're working in. For example, I've got an athlete who competes in jiu-jitsu. Now, if he's trying to make weight, I'm probably going to look at still using higher volumes during an accumulation phase, but it's going to be relative. So his higher volumes are going to be, as I've identified here in that second little point here, if looking to maintain weight, we're going to be working between 4 and 8 reps, as opposed to if we've, for example, my rugby athletes who are all developing as well. So most of those guys are in a position where they want to get an increase in muscle size. We're going to be working 12 reps, 10 reps, 8 reps, and then 5 to 8 reps in the last week of the accumulation phase. Intensification phase. So this is when we alternate from a focus on physiological adaptations to now neurological adaptations. So if I just go back a step, physiological adaptations are what's happening inside the muscle cells themselves at the site of the muscle contraction. Whereas neurological is about, like we mentioned earlier, muscles being slaves to the brain. So we get those big, strong muscles, that doesn't all happen at the same time. First, they get big, which gives you the potential to produce more force. Then we teach the brain how to use those new big muscles, and we make them work more efficiently. So we're going to be using moderate to low volumes with high intensities. It's worth noting that if you're of a young training age, we want probably moderate intensity. If you're very proficient in the training and you know all the exercises, then we can go quite high with intensity. So I've got 2 examples here, and this is less based on if we want to gain weight or not, and more to do with the training ability of the athlete. So if the athlete has low technical proficiency in lifts, I just use an 8-6-6-4 progression through a 4-week training block. But if they're very competent in the lifts, then we'll use like a modified Wendler progression. So I start off with a deload in a Wendler progression, modified Wendler system. So that's just a light week. It's going to give the athlete an opportunity to recover from all of the physiological stress that was placed on them in that previous accumulation phase. I don't use a deload week with younger athletes just because they bounce back very quickly. So in that week 1, for example, we're going to do, let's just for argument's sake, given that this is a modified Wendler, we'll say all of these are three sets of these repetitions that are listed here. We've got 3 sets of 5 week 1. That's going to be at 40, 50, and 60% of their training 1 RM. Week 2, 3 sets of 5. That's going to be 75, 80, 85%. Week 3, 3 sets of 3. We've worked up to 80, 85, 90%. And then week 4, we're actually going to use 3 sets. First set's going to be 5 reps, then we're going to go 3 reps, and then we're going to do a 2+ set, which is an open-ended set, meaning the athlete has to hit 2 reps, but they can keep going if they're feeling fresh and good. And that will be 85%, 90%, and 95%. We've got some programs later in this presentation with some actual proper examples there for you to look at. Peaking phase, reduce volumes further to limit residual fatigue. That doesn't mean we're skipping training sessions. That just means that maybe we're in the gym, we've just got 2 explosive exercises, we're doing 2 sets of 4 or something like that. Just get it done, short, sharp, explosive. Similar parameters as the intensification phase in terms of the load, so we've still got that high intensity factor there. But mainly because we're focusing on performing on game day, there's going to be a large focus on the sport itself. So like I mentioned, some practical examples here. So I've just adjusted this to remove some of the details here, just for the sake of privacy. But what we've got here is an accumulation phase. as you'll see here, this program is for a team. So I've got two groups identified down here at the bottom. So for example, we've got their squat progression. Some athletes are a bit older and more competent than others. So those guys will be doing a kettlebell front squat, and then those guys who are a little bit further behind in their training age will be doing a kettlebell goblet squat. Let's have a look at the progression over the weeks here. So this is an accumulation phase. We're starting off with 12, 3 sets of 12, 3 sets of 10, 3 sets of 8, and then we've got an 8-6-5 in that last week. We're just looking to set them up in terms of intensity for the next phase, for that intensification phase. So we just got that last week we start hitting some higher loads there. You also notice here that we've got a hang clean pull. That's actually on both days, and because that's a technical lift for these guys, we've got it on both days, and it's got an 8-6-6-4 progression there as well. We're just trying to learn the technique of the lift there. Another example here. This is one of my private athletes. This one's got a few different things in it that are worth noting. So this is an accumulation phase as well. However, he's got a decent training age in one lift, but not in the rest. So trap bar deadlift. You would have seen earlier that in my progressions, this was right at the end of my hip hinge progression. He's pretty good at this. He's been coached well in it. He knows what he's doing with this. So what we've got here is like an intensification phase style rep range here. So he wants to get big and strong in this lift. So I've actually added 2 sets of 10 at 60% at the end of his working set. So this is a deload week, 3 sets of 5 at 40, 50, 60%, and then 2 sets of 10 at 60 at the end. Week 2, 5, 5, 5 plus. That's an open-ended set to finish there. Got to hit 5 reps. Can keep going if he feels fresh. Plus 2 sets of 10 at 60% as well. 3 sets of 3, and then a 5, 3, 2 plus in the last week there. Just above that, we've got a hang clean pull mid-thigh. Just working with the bar only there. Again, just developing some technique. Like I mentioned, this guy's training age in other lifts is pretty much nil. So he's right at the start here with the kettlebell goblet squat. And we're working with higher reps here, which would be true to an accumulation phase. 12, 3 sets of 12, week 1, 3 sets of 10, 3 sets of 8, and then an 8-6-5. So I just wanted to thank you for having a look at this and checking it out, and I hope that you got something out of this. I hope that, especially with those practical examples there, you can see how all this stuff comes together. I'm always happy to take any questions, so if you just want to shoot me a direct message or a comment, or look me up on Instagram or Facebook. On Instagram, I'm at NK Athletic Performance. Same on Facebook, you can shoot me a message there, or you can send me an email, nathankiley1992@gmail.com. Always happy to help. I'm going to put together a part 2 where I discuss some running-based conditioning as well, so that you can really put together all of these things to have a well-rounded strength and conditioning program. Thank you, and we'll see you next time.